My name is Clara Jensen, 58 years old. I own a small antique restoration shop in Vermont, the kind of place that smells like dust, oil, and memory. That morning, sunlight fell through the blinds in thin, trembling lines, while my husband David stood at the kitchen counter, holding a folder of papers. "Sign these," he said, voice clipped. "The Italian cabinet order won't go through without your name on it." I wiped my hands on a rag still scented with varnish and took the pen he handed me, the silver fountain pen I'd given him on our 25th anniversary. The nib scraped slightly across the paper. It always did when the ink was running low. I didn't even read the lines. After 30 years of marriage, I didn't need to. When I was done, David smiled. That polite, rehearsed smile I hadn't seen since the days we hosted dinner parties. "Good," he said, closing the folder too quickly. "You've just saved us a lot of trouble." He kissed my forehead and left before the kettle had even started to whistle. 2 hours later, my phone rang. "Mrs. Jensen?" A man's voice asked, cold, professional. "This is Attorney Wallace. I'm calling to confirm you have agreed to the divorce settlement as written." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. The word divorce hung in the air like smoke from a fire I hadn't noticed. "The settlement," he repeated. "You've signed the papers voluntarily. We'll proceed with filing this afternoon." My mouth went dry. "Settlement for what?" I thought it was an order form. There was a pause. Paper rustled on his end of the line. "No, Mrs. Jensen. You signed the final decree of dissolution. Your husband's signature was already notarized." I didn't remember hanging up, but suddenly, the phone was on the floor. The room tilted. The tea kettle screamed from the stove, its whistle stabbing through my skull. I looked down at the table, at the faint blot of ink bleeding from the silver pen, spreading like a bruise across the grain of the wood. The smell of hot metal and burnt tea filled the air. For a few seconds I couldn't breathe. My hands felt foreign, as if they belonged to someone else, someone naive enough to sign away 30 years of her life between breakfast and noon. "I signed to keep our marriage together," I whispered to no one. I didn't know I was signing to end it. I used to believe I was one of the lucky ones. A solid marriage, a decent home, a son in medical school, and a little antique shop called Jensen's Treasure, that smelled of cedar and thyme. People would step in and say, "Your husband must adore having a wife this devoted." I would smile and polish another brass handle, pretending the compliment didn't sting just a little. For 20 years, I collected everything inside that store. Every porcelain figurine, every faded postcard, every cracked frame had a story I could tell by heart. When David decided to start his interior company, I sold half my inventory to fund it. I told everyone it was a joint dream, but truthfully, it was his. He used to bring me documents to sign after dinner, when the house smelled of lemon soap and wine. "Just paperwork, Clara," he'd say, sliding the pages across the table with that gentle impatience men reserve for women they've already stopped listening to. "Lauren, you're the smart one. I trust you more than anyone." And I believed him. Every single time. Sometimes I'd sign while our son Ethan practiced the piano in the next room, the notes falling soft and uneven. Those nights, the ink of that silver fountain pen glinted under the dining light, the same way it had when I gave it to David for our anniversary. He'd laughed then, calling it too elegant for a man who writes invoices. I told him, "It's not for invoices. It's for everything we'll build together." I didn't realize how prophetic that was. That he would build, and I would sign. When we first opened Jensen Interiors, we couldn't afford real employees. I handled the accounting, the clients, even the deliveries. David was the face. Charming, visionary, always shaking hands, always promising more than we could deliver. There was a time I was proud of that. The night he signed his first big contract, he lifted me off the ground and spun me in the kitchen, both of us laughing like the young fools we'd once been. "We made it, Clara." "No," I teased, breathless. "You made it. I'm just the paperwork." "Then keep signing," he said, kissing my cheek. "You're my lucky hand." I didn't know how true that line would turn out to be. Year after year, I kept signing. Mortgages. Insurance renewals. Supplier loans. I learned to recognize his hurried footsteps as he came home from meetings, always with another envelope tucked under his arm. I never read the small print. I read his face instead. When he smiled, I signed. When he frowned, I signed faster, hoping it might make him smile again. He told me once, "You don't need to understand all this legal jargon. You understand me, that's enough." And I thought it was love. Now I know it was blindness dressed as loyalty. Our shop became less mine and more his over the years. The brass sign still said Jensen's Treasure, but the treasures turned modern. Sleek furniture, minimalist decor, pieces with no history. I remember standing by the window one winter evening, watching David drive away with Nina, our soon-to-be daughter-in-law, in his passenger seat. They were headed to a client dinner, he said. She worked at his company then. Ambitious, sharp, the kind of woman who never forgot to wear red lipstick or take notes. When they came back late, I was still awake, pretending to read. David kissed my hair and whispered, "You worry too much." The silver pen lay on the table beside him, catching the reflection of the fireplace. For a moment, it looked like it was burning. I don't know exactly when I started feeling like a ghost in my own life. Maybe it was the day I realized every contract in the filing cabinet had my signature on it, and almost none had his. Maybe it was when Ethan stopped calling home from college, too busy to visit, echoing his father's voice more than I cared to admit. Still, I told myself I was lucky. Lucky that the bills were paid. Lucky that David still slept on the same side of the bed. Lucky that I could keep pretending the ink on those papers meant together. There was one night, a few months before the day I was tricked, when he asked me to sign something in the car. Rain hammered the windshield, and he held the papers out under the dim interior light. Just a renewal, honey. You don't even have to get out. Here. I hesitated. Can it wait until tomorrow? No, the courier's leaving first thing. I can't see what it says. Clara, he sighed. After all these years, you still don't trust me? The question hit me like a slap. I took the pen. My hand shook slightly, but I wrote my name anyway. Clara Jensen, neat and loyal. He smiled, folded the pages, and said, "That's my girl." I didn't realize he meant his girl, not his partner. When I think back now, I can trace every warning sign I ignored. The whispered calls that stopped when I entered the room. The mail he intercepted. The accountant who quit suddenly and never answered my texts again. And still, I kept showing up to the shop, restoring the lives of old objects while my own quietly fell apart. There was a mirror I once repaired. A 19th century Venetian piece, cracked down the center. I remember the way the break shimmered like lightning when the light hit it. I told a customer, "It's not broken, it's just split between past and present." Sometimes I think I was talking about myself. The night before everything collapsed, David brought home a bottle of wine. We sat by the fire, like we hadn't done in years. He poured me a glass and said, "We've come a long way, haven't we?" I nodded, too tired to question his sudden tenderness. He leaned over, touched my hand, and whispered, "You've been the backbone of everything. You don't say it enough." I smiled because after 2 decades, even crumbs of affection feel like a feast. Then he took the silver pen from his pocket and twirled it between his fingers. "Just a few more documents," he said softly, "and we can finally rest." "Rest?" I asked. "From what?" He laughed. "From worrying. From working. From all of this." So I signed again, while the ink caught the firelight. A bright, liquid scar across white paper. When David and I first married, we had nothing except a borrowed truck, a few boxes of tools, and the kind of hunger that feels almost holy when you're young. I still remember the night snow fell thick as flour, coating the street outside our tiny apartment. The radiator was broken again, and our breath hung in the air like ghosts. David had just brought home a stack of empty frames he'd salvaged from a flea market. "They'll sell," he said, eyes bright, cheeks flushed red from the cold. "People want stories hanging on their walls. I'll make them look new." We stayed up all night sanding those frames, side by side on the kitchen floor. My fingers blistered, his knuckles bled, and yet we laughed until dawn. The smell of wood dust clung to our hair for days. That week, I sold my mother's ring, a thin gold band with 3 tiny opals. It was the only inheritance she'd left me. I told David I'd lost it in the snow. I couldn't bear to see the guilt on his face. But I used the money to rent a small storefront on Main Street. He was so proud when we painted the sign together. Jensen and Co. The brush trembled in my hand, half from cold, half from disbelief that something could finally be ours. If we survive this winter, he told me, wrapping his arms around my waist, I'll add your name to the sign. You'll see. Promise? Promise, he said, pressing the silver pen into my hand. You'll sign it yourself. I kept that pen like a charm, carrying it in my apron pocket through every slow season, every bounce check, every long day when the store stayed empty and we still smiled for the one customer who wandered in. The first year, we ate canned soup and called it gourmet. The second, we managed to afford matching cups, chipped, but ours. By the third, we had regulars who came not for the furniture, but for the way David could tell a story about every piece we restored. He'd say, "This table saw 3 generations of family dinners," or "This chair used to sit by a window in Florence." And I'd listen, polishing each item like I was polishing the life we were building. People loved him. He had that kind of voice, confident, certain, the voice of a man who could make anyone believe in tomorrow. I loved that voice. Maybe that's why I stopped hearing the parts that didn't include us. One evening, I found the old brush we'd used to paint the sign. The bristles were stiff, the handle cracked. I held it up to the light and asked him, "When will we finally change the name?" He didn't even look up from his ledger. Jensen and Co. sounds more professional, Clara. Clients prefer something simple. Simple, I repeated, like pretending I don't exist. He laughed, not unkindly. Don't be dramatic. You're the heart of this business. You just don't need your name on the door for people to know that. I nodded, even smiled. But later that night, I stood outside and traced the letters on the frosted glass. The cold bit through my glove as I whispered the words out loud. Jensen and Co. And wondered which part of it was me. The years blurred after that. We bought a better shop, a bigger house, a nicer car. But sometimes, when the first snow fell each winter, I would remember that night we carried the frames through the storm. 2 kids with nothing but a dream and a promise written in the air. The same promise that faded season after season, until all that was left was the echo of his laughter and a sign that never changed. 20 years later, the shop window gleamed with gold letters, Jensen design. Customers praised it, said it looked elegant. But every time I passed by, I saw the blank space beside his name. The space where mine was supposed to be. And I realized something quietly brutal. He didn't forget to add me. He simply never intended to. Lately, small things had begun to feel off. David came home later than usual, his excuses short and smooth, as if rehearsed. The air around him carried the faint scent of another perfume. Not floral, not mine, but sharp, expensive, and foreign. And then there was Nina, my daughter-in-law. She had always been polite in the way people are when they want something from you. Lately, her texts came more often, each one wrapped in urgency. "Mom, Dad said you should sign the papers soon, the contract's delayed." "Mom, if it's not done by Thursday, the whole shipment will be stuck." "Mom, it's just routine. Trust him." I asked once, "Why can't David sign them himself?" She replied with a little laugh, "He's too busy fixing everyone else's messes." I wanted to believe her. After all, hadn't I built half my life on believing him? One night, I stayed late in the shop counting the day's sales. The clock had just struck 9 when I heard muffled voices coming from the office upstairs. David's tone was low, firm. Nina's softer, coaxing. I took a step closer, my shoes barely whispering on the old wood floor. "She won't suspect," Nina said. "She never does," David answered. "And if she asks? I'll tell her it's for the business. She always signs. She trusts me." A beat of silence. Then her voice again, quieter. "You're sure this will work?" "It has to. Once the papers are filed, everything's clean." The sound of glasses clinking, then laughter. I froze at the bottom of the stairs. My name wasn't said, but it didn't have to be. I knew the rhythm of their words too well. When I pushed the office door open a moment later, both of them fell silent. David turned, too casually. Clara, you're still here? Nina smiled. That practiced kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. We were just talking numbers, Mom. Numbers. Always numbers. I nodded, forcing a smile. I see. And I did. Not the numbers, but the way Nina's hand lingered on David's sleeve a second too long before she stepped back. That night, at home, I couldn't sleep. The rain tapped on the window in slow, deliberate beats like someone counting down. On the dresser beside me lay the silver fountain pen, the same one I'd used to sign every contract, every promise, every invisible surrender. Its surface no longer shone the way it used to. The metal had dulled, cold under my fingertips. I thought of all the things I'd signed without question, and of all the things I might have just signed away. In the quiet, I whispered, "Maybe it's nothing." But the words didn't sound like comfort. They sounded like a lie, rehearsed too many times. The next morning, David handed me another folder before leaving for work. "Can you drop your signature here?" he asked. I looked at the empty line, the familiar black border. "Do you ever get tired of my name?" I asked lightly. He paused, frowning. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I said, forcing a laugh. "It's just a lot of paperwork." He smiled again, the same way he always did when he wanted something. "You've always been my safest pair of hands." When the door closed behind him, I stared at the papers for a long time before picking up the pen. The ink rolled smoothly, leaving behind the neat, curved letters of Clara Jensen. The sound of the nib scratching against the paper was strangely loud, like something being sealed shut. Later, sunlight slipped across the kitchen table, catching the silver pen and turning it to ice. I watched the reflection tremble on the wall, as if the light itself was trying to warn me. I didn't know then whether I'd just signed the day of my greatest loss, or the first day of my freedom. The lawyer's voice still echoed in my ear as I drove through the narrow Vermont streets, snow dusting the windshield like salt. He'd said it so matter-of-factly. "You signed the divorce agreement, Mrs. Jensen. It's all finalized." By the time I reached David's office, my hands had stopped trembling. Not because I was calm, but because the fear had burned itself out, leaving something colder behind. The secretary looked up when I walked in. "Mrs. Jensen, he's in a meeting." I didn't stop. I opened the glass door to his office anyway. David was sitting behind his mahogany desk, the same one I'd bought for him years ago as a congratulations gift. Nina stood beside him, flipping through papers, her red nails a flash of color against white pages. Both of them froze when they saw me. "Clara," David began, standing. "You shouldn't just—" "I need to see the file I signed," I said. My voice sounded strange, detached, like it belonged to someone watching from outside the window. Nina tried to interject. "It's confidential, Mrs. Jensen." But I looked straight at David. "I signed it. That makes it mine, doesn't it?" Something in my tone made him hesitate. He pulled open a drawer, took out a folder, and placed it on the table with exaggerated calm. "Fine. Take a look." The papers smelled faintly of his cologne and printer ink, an odd combination of familiarity and deceit. My eyes caught the bold line near the end. "Clara Jensen agrees to retain all real estate and the primary account of Jensen Interiors." Blinked, once, twice, the words didn't change. "Every property, every account, my name, alone." And below that, in neat black ink, "David Jensen. To retain minority shares." For a moment, I couldn't make sense of it. My breath came shallow, slow. Slowly, I looked up. "What is this?" He didn't answer right away, just pressed his lips together, a faint smirk tugging the corner. "You really don't know, do you?" "Know what?" "That Nina uploaded the wrong version," he said, almost amused. "She drafted two, one to give me everything, one as a backup. She mixed up the copies when she printed them." My heart stopped. "So You signed the version where you get it all." The room tilted slightly. I gripped the edge of the desk to steady myself. You set me up, I whispered. No, Clara, he said, leaning back. You set me up, without even trying. His laugh was quiet, not cruel exactly, but full of disbelief, like a magician watching his trick turn on him. Guess you finally beat me at my own game, he said. I looked down at the silver fountain pen lying on his desk, the one he'd used to make me believe every signature was a gesture of love. It gleamed under the fluorescent light, cold and flawless. I picked it up slowly, weighing it in my palm. So that's it? I asked. All these years. Every paper, every promise, and it ends because of one mistake? David shrugged. That's business. Don't take it personally. Something inside me snapped, not with fury, but with a clarity so sharp it almost felt gentle. I placed the pen back on the desk, the nib facing him. You're right, I said quietly. I won't. He looked up, confused. Because for the first time, this isn't business. This is freedom. I turned toward the door but paused. My hand rested on the frame, and I looked back just once. Giddy, I said. It's the first time my signature has ever meant something real. He frowned, uncertain whether I was mocking him. Maybe I was. Maybe I wasn't. Outside, the air was sharp with the bite of winter. I walked to my car, snow crunching under my boots, every sound clear and new. For years I'd moved through life in a fog, signing, agreeing, yielding. Now, each breath hurt a little, but it was mine. I sat behind the wheel for a long time, staring at my reflection in the dark windshield. I thought of that first shop, the gold letters missing my name, the promises buried under paint. All gone now, all finally mine. That night, I made tea in silence. The kettle whistled, the same shrill note that had filled the house for decades. But the table was different. No folders, no pen, no man waiting for me to sign my life away. I took out my old ledger, flipped to the first page, and wrote something across the top in clean, deliberate strokes. New inventory, freedom, 1 unit. Then I laughed, softly, for the first time in years. David and Nina disappeared for a few weeks after that day. No calls, no letters, just silence. The kind that hums too loudly inside your head. Then came the whispers. At first, they were small, half heard in the grocery aisle, caught behind someone's polite smile. By the second week, the whole town had its version. Did you hear? Clara tricked her husband into signing everything over. Cleaned him out. Poor man. She always looked so decent, too. The antique shop, once a cozy refuge of ticking clocks and polished wood, became a glass box for rumors to rattle through. Someone spray-painted the words across my window one night in dripping red, EOLD Digger. Grandma. I stood there at dawn, coffee cooling in my hands, staring at the words bleeding down the glass. It should have broken me, but all I felt was an odd, steady calm. Like the surface of a frozen lake, dangerous and beautiful all at once. I fetched a rag, the same one I'd used for years to wipe dust off forgotten mirrors. The smell of solvent filled the air, sharp, stinging, almost medicinal. Each stroke erased a little more of the insult until the window shone again, reflecting my own face back at me. The woman in the glass looked older, yes, but not defeated. There was a kind of steel in her eyes that hadn't been there before. For the first time, I realized I wasn't scrubbing away their words. I was polishing mine. People stopped coming in for a while. Old clients crossed the street when they saw me. Even Ethan, my son, called only once, his voice clipped, uneasy. Mom, Dad says you took everything. Did he also tell you what he planned to take from me first? Silence. Then, I don't want to get involved. The line went dead. That hurt more than the graffiti, because lies from a stranger can't touch you. But silence from your own child can hollow you out. We see, days blurred into each other. I kept the shop open anyway, arranging the same displays, polishing the same silver, pretending business was normal. Routine became a kind of armor. At night, I'd sit by the counter under the warm hum of the desk lamp, reading the legal documents again. Every line that proved the company, the house, even the accounts were in my name. It wasn't greed that made me hold on to them. It was survival. For years I'd handed over trust like currency, now I was finally cashing in what was left of it. On the shelf beside me sat the silver fountain pen, glinting faintly under the light. I picked it up, feeling its weight. Not as a reminder of him, but of me. For years, it had been David's instrument. Now, it was mine. I uncapped it, drew a single line across an empty page, and watched the ink spread clean and sure. The sound, that soft scratch of metal on paper, was the only proof I needed that I was still here. By the third week, the rumors began to fade, replaced by newer gossip. Someone else's scandal took center stage, as they always do in small towns. But the stain on my window had left a faint outline. A ghost of the words that once accused me. Sometimes I left it there on purpose, a reminder that truth doesn't always arrive dressed in innocence. When customers finally trickled back in, I greeted them with the same calm smile as before. No explanations, no defenses. I'd spent half my life signing my name under someone else's decisions. Now, for the first time, I was the only one holding the pen. It was a gray afternoon when they came back. I knew they would, eventually. People like David don't vanish when they lose. They regroup. The sound of tires crunching over the gravel outside the shop made me glance up from the teacup I was polishing. A black sedan pulled into the lot. Out stepped David, Nina, and a man in a charcoal suit carrying a briefcase. The kind of man paid to make lies sound legal. Behind them trailed two neighbors, curious eyes pretending to be witnesses. For a moment, I almost laughed. Even my downfall had become a community event. The bell above the door chimed as they entered, bringing a gust of cold air with them. David's expression was tight, jaw set the way it used to be when a deal went wrong. "Clara," he said, almost formal. "We need to talk." I gestured toward the small table near the window. "Then talk." He didn't sit. Instead, he pulled a stack of papers from his folder and threw them onto the table. The pages fanned out like white birds scattering in panic. "You can't live off stolen property," he said. "Sign these. We'll reverse the transfer quietly before this gets uglier." I took a sip of my tea, letting the steam fog my glasses before answering. "No one stole anything, David. You just overestimated your own cleverness." Nina stepped forward, eyes blazing. She'd traded her soft office blouses for a sharp blazer, her confidence sharper still. "If you had a shred of decency, you'd give back what doesn't belong to you." I met her gaze. Calm, level. "Decency isn't listed in the contract, dear. But signatures are." Her mouth opened, then snapped shut. Across the room, the lawyer cleared his throat. "Mrs. Jensen," he said, "perhaps we can settle this amicably." "My clients?" "Clients?" I interrupted. "He's still my husband on paper. Or didn't you check who owns the marriage license?" The lawyer blinked, uncomfortable. David exhaled sharply. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." I set my teacup down gently. The clink against porcelain sounded almost musical in the silence. "Harder?" "You forged my trust for 20 years, David. I think I can handle a few sheets of paper." He stepped closer, voice low. "You're ruining what's left of our reputation. Our reputation died the day you let her call me mom while helping you cheat the law." Nina's hand twitched at her side. "You think you're so righteous," she spat. "You're just bitter because he finally chose someone younger." I smiled, not kindly. "No, dear. I'm calm because he finally chose wrong." The lawyer began gathering the papers, muttering something about reconsideration clauses. But I reached out and stopped him with a single hand on the folder. "Leave them. I'd like to frame one as a souvenir." David's patience cracked. He slammed his palm on the table, rattling the teacup. "Don't push me, Clara." "Push you?" I said softly. "You've been pushing me for years." I just stopped moving. The air felt thick, almost electric. Even the neighbors by the door had fallen silent. One of them, Mrs. Porter, the one who used to gossip about my curtains, clutched her purse tighter, her face pale with fascination. Nina crossed her arms. "Fine," she said. "Keep your money. You'll die alone, surrounded by antiques no one wants." "I already did die once," I replied. "The day I signed the last paper for him. Everything since has been resurrection." The words hung between us. Even David's lawyer looked at me differently then. Not with pity, but a flicker of respect he quickly disguised as neutrality. I turned to David, my voice steady. You always said I was too sentimental, that I couldn't separate love from logic. You were right. I mixed them together until I forgot where one ended and the other began. He looked away, jaw tight. But today, I continued, I can tell them apart. I reached for the silver fountain pen on the counter. The same one he'd once used to bind me to every deal, every lie. I rolled it between my fingers, feeling the familiar groove where my thumb fit perfectly after decades of habit. You wanted me to sign my life away, David. And I did. But you forgot. Signatures cut both ways. Then I placed the pen back down, neatly, beside the stack of useless documents he'd brought. He stared at me, searching for the weak spot that used to be there. The woman who'd cry when he raised his voice, who'd apologize for things she didn't do. But that woman wasn't here anymore. This isn't over, he said finally. It already is, I replied. You just haven't accepted the ending yet. He turned sharply, motioning for Nina to follow. She lingered for a second, as if wanting to say something. Maybe to spit, maybe to plead. But when she met my eyes, whatever she saw there made her think better of it. They left without another word. The neighbors shuffled awkwardly, pretending not to stare. Mrs. Porter murmured, I always knew you were the smart one, Clara. I smiled faintly. No, you didn't. But thank you for saying it now. When the last of them left, the bell above the door gave one final chime. Small, delicate, final. The shop felt strangely lighter, as if someone had opened a window I hadn't realized was shut. I picked up the tea again. It had gone cold. Outside, the sky had begun to clear, streaks of pale light pushing through the clouds. I sat there for a while, tracing the rim of the cup with my finger. In the reflection of the glass window, the silver pen glimmered faintly beside the abandoned papers. I used to sign because I trusted people, I whispered. Now I sign because I trust myself. For the first time, the words didn't sound defiant. They sounded peaceful. The peace didn't last long. Within a week, David and Nina had done what they did best. Turned their failure into a performance. They filed a preliminary lawsuit. They told everyone who'd listen that I'd forged his signature, that I'd manipulated a senile old man into surrendering his assets. It was almost funny, the way the town flipped overnight. The same people who once praised me for saving antiques now whispered that I'd stolen a man's future. The newspaper ran a small headline. Local businessman accuses ex-wife of fraudulent claim. No photo, but everyone knew who it was. I tried not to care. But it's strange how fast lies can rot the air around you. Customers came in with forced smiles, eyes darting around the shelves as if betrayal might be hiding between the furniture. One evening, as I was closing the shop, someone knocked on the glass door. It was Lucas Grant, a young attorney who used to browse my shop every Sunday for old law books. He couldn't have been more than 30, with the kind of open face that hadn't yet learned to hide exhaustion. Mrs. Jensen, he said, breath fogging against the window. May I come in? I hesitated. Lawyers had become a kind of allergy by then, but something in his tone wasn't sharp or strategic. It was protective. I unlocked the door. You're here to sue me too? He smiled faintly. No, ma'am. I'm here to make sure you don't get swallowed alive. We sat at the counter, the old brass lamp between us casting warm circles on the wood. He opened his folder carefully, like someone handling fragile evidence. They can't win, he said simply. Not if you still have the originals. Originals, contracts, invoices. Anything with your husband's signature. But most importantly, he paused, looking at me. The pen. You still have the pen you used, right? For a second, I didn't understand. Then it clicked. The silver fountain pen. The same one that had marked every document, every promise. I reached into the drawer beneath the counter. The metal was cool when I touched it, familiar. The engraving along the side had faded almost completely, but when I tilted it under the light, 3 faint letters shimmered through the years of wear. For C. Lucas leaned closer. Oh, that's it. I frowned. You think this little thing can save me? He nodded. It's not just a pen, it's the forensic proof. Each pen leaves a unique pressure pattern, like a fingerprint. If he tries to claim forgery, we can prove it's authentic. He inked, startled. You mean, all this time, the same tool he used to trap me could clear my name? Lucas smiled, half sad, half impressed. That's poetic justice if I've ever seen it. For the first time in weeks, I laughed. A small, real laugh that cracked the tension like thin glass. I turned the pen in my hand, watching the faint gleam along the ridge. He gave this to me on our anniversary, I said quietly. Said it was for every signature of ours to come. Looks like it kept his promise, Lucas said. But as he spoke, I saw something shift in his expression. The kind of look a person gets when they're weighing whether to say something dangerous. There's more, he said. Nina's name shows up in a few strange filings. She's trying to move funds out of the company before the hearing. She's stealing? Technically. Diverting. But yes. He hesitated. If they succeed, they'll claim insolvency, and you'll get blamed for draining the assets. I leaned back slowly. The world had a cruel sense of symmetry. They were stealing from me again, only this time under the banner of justice. Then stop them, I said. I will. But I'll need you to stay very still, Mrs. Spy. Jensen. Don't react publicly. Don't post. Don't even defend yourself. Let them think you're retreating. It was strange. Being told to do nothing after a lifetime of doing everything wrong. But there was something comforting about the strategy. Quiet felt powerful again. The next few days blurred into a routine of patience. Rumors reached me through the grapevine. That David was boasting about taking back what was his. That Nina was posting cryptic quotes online about karma catching up to thieves. I ignored them. I opened the shop every morning, dusted the same shelves, arranged the same teacups, and waited. One afternoon, a woman came in holding a copy of the newspaper. She was trembling, not from anger, from curiosity. Is it true? She asked. Did you trick him? If I had, I said, do you think I'd still be here, open 6 days a week? She blushed, murmured an apology, and left with a set of candlesticks she didn't need. Guilt has a way of making people generous. That night, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a printed screenshot. Nina's private message thread with an unknown contact. Once we get her to react, we can sue for defamation. She'll break. And the funds? Already moving. By the time she notices, she'll look guilty. No signature. But the timestamp was recent. Lucas confirmed it came from someone inside their office, probably a staffer who'd had enough. They're digging their own grave, he said. We just have to let them finish the hole. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house creaked softly, the way old houses do when they remember too much. I sat by the window, holding the pen again. The engraving caught the moonlight. For C. It used to mean for Clara. Now it meant for courage. I thought of the girl I used to be. Sanding frames beside David in a frozen apartment, believing every promise. And I thought of the woman I was now. Signing nothing without reading, trusting no one who said trust me. The transformation wasn't pretty, but it was real. The next morning, I met Lucas at the courthouse. He handed me a folder filled with copies, annotations, and a single sticky note that said, "They're bluffing. Let them." We walked through the hall, our footsteps echoing. Nina and David stood at the far end with their lawyer, whispering in low tones. David looked thinner, angrier. When his eyes met mine, he smiled. That old, charming smile meant to disarm. It didn't work anymore. Nina avoided my gaze, pretending to check her phone. I noticed her nails. Chipped red polish, trembling hands. Fear doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it hides under manicures. Lucas leaned toward me. He'll try one last bluff. Don't speak. Just let me handle it. I nodded. For once, silence didn't feel like surrender. When the session ended, they stormed out, faces pale, whispers sharp. Lucas turned to me, calm as ever. I know they've lost, but they'll keep trying through the press. It'll get uglier before it gets quiet. I looked down at the pen in my hand. The weight of it was strangely comforting. It's fine, I said. I've learned to live through noise. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, soft, slow, unhurried. I tilted my face up to it, breathing in the cold air. The pen rested in my palm, small but solid, like a fragment of truth that refused to rust. This used to be a wedding gift, I said quietly, more to myself than to Lucas. Now? He asked. Now it's evidence I survived him. He smiled faintly. That's one way to redefine a signature. It was Lucas who found it. He showed up at the shop one icy morning, cheeks red from the cold, laptop bag slung over his shoulder. Mrs. Jensen, he said, breathless but smiling, I think we've got them. He spread his laptop open on the counter, turning the screen toward me. Lines of text and file names blurred past as he scrolled. You remember how Nina said she was helping David with the contracts? Well, she left fingerprints all over the digital file. He didn't just format it, she edited it. He opened 2 PDFs side by side. One bore the name Final Agreement EV2, PDFs. The other draft client copy, PDFs. The difference was subtle. A few rearranged lines, a signature block swapped between versions. But to Lucas's trained eye, it was everything. She changed the ownership clause, he explained. The version she meant to send to the court gave everything to David. But the one she printed for you? The one you actually signed, was the unedited draft. My heart thudded once, hard. So when she said, make sure she signs, I'll fix it later, he clicked another tab, revealing the email chain. There it was. In black and white, Nina's words, ensure she signs this copy. I'll correct it after she's done. The timestamp was from the night before the signing. Her digital signature sat neatly below the message, like a confession she didn't know she'd written. I stared at it for a long time, not with triumph, with disbelief that the truth could look so plain after so much chaos. He printed everything. Lucas insisted on chain of custody protocol, sealed envelopes, notarized copies, time-stamped affidavits. I followed his instructions without question. Each click of the printer felt like a gavel striking. When we finished, I asked, what happens now? He leaned back in the chair, exhaling. Now we let them know we've seen everything. They'll panic before they even step into court. He was right. The next evening, my phone rang. The caller ID said David Jensen. For a second, my thumb hovered above decline. Then I answered. His voice was lower than usual, stripped of confidence. Clara, he said, please, don't make this public. It'll destroy us. Us? I repeated softly. There hasn't been an us's in a long time. I didn't know she changed the file. I swear. I only wanted to speed things up. You wanted everything, I said. And now you have what you gave me, consequences. He hesitated. I could hear the sound of him exhaling, the faint clink of ice in a glass. Clara, I made mistakes. But dragging this into court, it helps no one. It helps the truth, I said. And I think we've both avoided that long enough. He went quiet. Then, almost a whisper. I just trusted the wrong person. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the words settle like ash. You're right, I said finally. You trusted the wrong person. Clara? And that person, I said, voice steady, was me. There was a silence so deep, it felt like the world paused. Ugh. Then the line went dead. The next morning, Lucas filed the evidence. He called me later to say the court clerk had verified the metadata. Nina's edits were traceable, time-stamped, undeniable. This will turn the whole case, he said. No, I corrected gently. It will end it. That night, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt clean. For the first time in years, there were no secrets left hovering over my name. I placed the printed email into my archive box, right beside the silver fountain pen. The 2 items sat together like strange companions, one born of betrayal, the other reborn as proof. When I closed the lid, I whispered, You tried to silence me with ink. I answered with evidence. The best revenge, I've learned, isn't rage. its elegance. So when the court date loomed near and whispers about my fraud still flickered through town, I decided to host a charity auction at Jensen's Treasure. At least, that's what the invitation said. Proceeds to support young artisans, the flyers read. The truth was simpler. I wasn't trying to raise money. I was raising the curtain. In the days before the event, I polished every inch of the shop. Each antique seemed to hum under my hands. Mirrors, vases, old clocks, all of them silent witnesses to my story. Lucas helped with logistics, booking a small press photographer and making sure the local paper would send someone for coverage. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, adjusting his tie as we reviewed the guest list. "You could just win in court and stay quiet." "Quiet is what almost killed me," I said. "This time people will hear me, even if I only speak once." By the afternoon of the auction, the shop looked almost holy. Golden light spilled through the tall windows, catching dust like confetti. The air smelled of lemon polish and cedar, the scent of old things learning to shine again. Neighbors came dressed in their Sunday best, curious to see what poor Clara was up to. David didn't come, but I knew he'd sent someone to record it. That was fine. This show was meant for him too. When everyone had gathered, I walked to the center of the room and tapped my glass lightly. The murmur quieted. Cameras flashed. "Thank you for being here," I began. My voice didn't shake. "It means more than you know." I gestured toward a small display case near the back. Inside, under a soft beam of light, lay a single object, a silver fountain pen resting on a strip of velvet. A card beside it read, in my handwriting, "This pen once signed a sentence." And then, a salvation. A ripple of curiosity moved through the crowd. I continued, calm but clear. "This piece isn't for sale. It's not even valuable in money. But for me, it's the most expensive thing I've ever owned." Someone chuckled awkwardly, unsure if I was joking. I smiled faintly. "You see, this pen signed every document that built my marriage, my business, and, unknowingly, my freedom. Every line of trust and betrayal written in the same ink. I could feel the weight of their eyes, of their understanding slowly forming. Not pity, not judgment, something quieter. Recognition. I've learned," I said, "that sometimes the only way to reclaim your voice is to write your own ending." Then I nodded to Lucas, who turned on the small projector we'd set up. On the wall behind me appeared the blown-up email. Nina's confession, the proof of forgery. A few gasps rippled through the crowd. I didn't need to say a word about guilt or innocence. The facts did it for me. When the brief murmuring settled, I finished simply. This shop was once built on other people's stories. I think it's time mine joined them. Applause started slowly, then grew. Not thunderous, but warm, human. Reporters scribbled, flashbulbs popped, and for the first time in months, I wasn't a rumor. I was a person again. After everyone left, I stayed behind to clean up. Lucas leaned against the counter, smiling. "You didn't just clear your name," he said. "Who made it untouchable?" "I didn't want revenge," I replied, placing the pen back into its glass case. "I just wanted to tell the truth beautifully." The reflection of the pen gleamed in the glass, a sliver of light, small but unyielding. I took a small note card and slid it beneath the display. On it I wrote, "This item signed a verdict and also signed a release. This object once signed a sentence and also a release." Then I locked the case and turned off the lights. As I stood in the doorway, ready to leave, I glanced back at the pen one last time. It sat there in the dark, catching the last bit of sunset. Once a weapon, now a witness. And I realized I hadn't just prepared a counterattack. I'd written my confession, my defense, and my freedom, all in one stroke. The auction had been running for nearly an hour. Smooth, polite, exactly as I'd planned. Crystal chandeliers caught the light, throwing soft diamonds across the walls of my little shop. Guests murmured, wine glasses clinked, and the air smelled faintly of polish and anticipation. The local news crew filmed quietly near the back, their camera turning slowly from one antique to another, waiting for something interesting to happen. They didn't have to wait long. The door burst open. The bell above it gave a shrill, startled chime, and in swept David. Face flushed, eyes sharp, followed by Nina, heels clicking like tiny hammers against the floor. Behind them trailed their lawyer, trying to look authoritative but mostly looking embarrassed. Every head turned. The murmurs died. "There she is," David announced, voice booming, pretending to be some tragic victim while she auctions off what she stole. The camera swung toward him, the red light blinking alive. For a heartbeat, the room froze. Then I set down my wineglass. "Good evening, David," I said evenly. "You're late. The donations table is by the door." A few guests chuckled nervously, but David wasn't smiling. He strode forward, holding a folder like a sword. "Who forged my signature?" "What? You tricked the court. You've been parading around as if you're innocent." Nina stepped up beside him, her voice sharp and high-pitched. "You think anyone here believes you? Everyone knows you trapped him." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mr. and Mrs. Jensen, perhaps we shouldn't." "Stay out of it," David snapped. I looked around at the crowd, half shocked, half fascinated. There's nothing a small town loves more than a scandal, and here it was. Live, unscripted, intimate. I could see Lucas at the back of the room, shaking his head slowly, but his eyes told me, "Let them speak." So I did. I folded my hands on the podium and let David's accusations fill the room, like smoke choking out the air. When he finally paused for breath, I said softly, "Are you finished?" He sneered. "Not until you admit what you've done." I tilted my head. "What exactly would you like me to admit? That I trusted you? That I signed every paper you put in front of me? Or that you lost everything because you were too careless to read what you signed?" A ripple of whispers spread through the audience. David blinked. "Don't twist this, Clara." "No," I said, stepping forward. "Let's untwist it instead." From beneath the podium, I lifted a thick envelope. I didn't need to look at Lucas. I knew he was watching. Inside the envelope lay the thing David had spent weeks denying existed. The original copy of the contract. The one with his thumbprint, still faintly visible beside his signature. I held it up. "This," I said, voice steady, "is the document you signed yourself. Lettering hasn't faded. The print hasn't changed. Would you like to see it?" The lawyer moved forward nervously. "Mrs. Jensen, perhaps this isn't—" "You wanted a public confrontation," I said, cutting him off. "Now it's public." I stepped closer to David, just enough for the cameras to catch the contrast. Him trembling with anger, me perfectly still. "You told me to sign things I didn't understand," I said quietly. "Tell me, David. Now that you've read what you signed, do you understand?" The words hit the air like a gavel strike. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Nina grabbed his arm, whispering something urgent, but he shook her off. The camera zoomed in. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised. For a moment it was silent, so still I could hear the faint tick of an antique clock behind me. Then, from somewhere in the back, a single pair of hands began to clap. It was Mrs. Porter, my nosy neighbor, the same woman who once called me a gold digger. Her applause was hesitant at first, then firm. One by one, others joined her. The sound grew, soft claps turning into steady rhythm, echoing off the walls until the entire room was filled with it. David stood frozen in the middle of it all, red-faced and small beneath the light. Nina's mascara had begun to run. She was whispering furiously, but no one was listening anymore. I placed the document gently on the table beside the silver fountain pen, now displayed in its glass case. "This pen once signed my sentence," I said, loud enough for the cameras. "And today, it signs my freedom." Applause again, louder this time. David's lawyer muttered something about needing to leave and began steering them toward the door. Reporters surged forward, microphones flashing, questions overlapping. "Mrs. Jensen, is it true your husband's lawyer submitted falsified files? Do you plan to press charges? What will you do next?" I raised a hand, silencing them. "What I'll do next," I said, "is go home, drink tea, and finally, sleep without waiting for someone to hand me another lie to sign." The crowd laughed, then clapped again, not mockingly, but with the kind of approval reserved for someone who's finally done with fear. As David and Nina left, the cameras followed them, catching the tightness in his jaw, the tremor in her hands. They'd come to expose me, but ended up exposed instead. When the doors swung shut behind them, the tension that had clung to the room for months seemed to evaporate. Lucas approached, shaking his head in disbelief. "You handled that perfectly." "I just told the truth," I said. "Yes," he smiled, "but you made it art." After the reporters left, I walked to the display case one last time. The pen gleamed faintly under the lights, its engraving catching the glow. "For C," I whispered almost to myself. "For courage." Then I closed the lid. Outside, the winter air was crisp, the kind that burns but wakes you up. I stood on the steps of the shop, watching the last of the guests drift away under the street lamps. One of them, a young woman I didn't know, paused and said quietly, "I came here to buy something old. I think I just witnessed something new." I smiled. Maybe both. Later, when I was alone again, I replayed the moment in my head. The silence, the applause, the look on David's face when he realized the crowd wasn't on his side anymore. And it struck me. He had spent his whole life performing for approval. The charming businessman, the devoted husband, the man who always looked in control. But in that one moment, his audience changed. They stopped clapping for him. They started clapping for me. I turned off the lights, the echo of applause still faint in my ears. Before locking up, I glanced once more at the words I'd written on the display card beside the pen. This object once signed a sentence, and also a release. It no longer felt like a metaphor. It was a record. The judgment came on a quiet Thursday morning. Lucas called me just after dawn. His voice, usually brisk and efficient, carried a rare softness. "It's done," he said. "The court ruled in your favor. The property, the company shares, the accounts, all legally yours." For a moment, I didn't say anything. The words didn't rush in like triumph. They settled slowly, like snow falling on still water. I looked around the shop, my shop. The faint smell of polish and oak filling the air. The antique clock above the counter ticked once, twice, steady and certain. "Thank you, Lucas," I said finally. "Not for winning, for believing." He laughed. "You did most of the believing yourself." After he hung up, I stood alone in the morning light, the silence pressing in like a long exhale. No applause, no camera flashes, just peace, the kind that doesn't need witnesses. By the end of that week, the legal notices were printed, the dust settled, and the gossip shifted elsewhere. I walked down Main Street one afternoon and realized that people weren't staring anymore. They smiled, some shyly, some with quiet admiration. It wasn't about vindication. It was about being ordinary again, free. I decided to change the shop's name. The old sign, "Jensen's Treasure," had been hanging there for 20 years, heavy with a story that no longer belonged to me. The new one arrived on a windy Saturday, the silver letters glinting softly against dark wood. Silver signature. Below it, in smaller cursive, "Every mark tells a story." When I hung the sign myself, a few locals stopped to watch. Mrs. Porter waved from across the street calling, "It suits you." I smiled. It's the only signature I haven't regretted. Inside, I rearranged everything. The front display was now open, light-filled, no longer crowded with reminders of the past. At the very center, inside a glass case, I placed one single object. The silver fountain pen. Its nib was dull now, the engraving almost invisible. But under the afternoon sun, it still glowed faintly, like a scar healed into something beautiful. I wrote a small placard for it. Not for the customers, but for myself. Who? This pen no longer writes. It remembers. It reminds me never to sign when my heart trembles. Sometimes, tourists stopped and read it. Some smiled, some frowned, some just nodded quietly before moving on. They didn't know the whole story, and they didn't need to. Life resumed its rhythm. Each morning I opened the shop, brewed coffee, dusted the shelves. Sometimes Lucas dropped by, claiming he was just in the neighborhood. He'd lean against the counter and tease, "You know, most people celebrate winning a case by retiring." And miss the fun of cleaning antiques? I'd laugh, "Never." He grinned. "Then promise me one thing. Next time someone hands you papers to sign, I'll read every word," I finished for him. Twice. At night, I'd sit by the front window, watching the reflection of the new sign shimmer faintly in the glass. Silver signature. The name felt right, not flashy, not bitter, just true. It carried everything I'd learned. That survival isn't loud, and freedom doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it just breathes quietly after a long silence. I still caught myself tracing my name in the air sometimes, not out of habit, but gratitude. Each letter was steady now. Months passed. Spring came to Vermont, thawing the hard edges of winter. One morning, a young woman stepped into the shop, mid-20s, nervous, holding a folded stack of papers. "Mrs. Jensen?" she asked. "My mother said you might help me. I need advice before signing a business partnership." Her voice trembled, her hands too. I smiled and gestured for her to sit. "You came to the right place," I said. "Let's read it together." As we went over the pages, I caught my reflection in the glass case beside us. The faint outline of a woman older, steadier, unafraid. When she left, she said softly, "Thank you. I thought I was weak for being scared." "Being scared just means you care about what happens next," I told her. "Goodness, that's not weakness, that's awareness." After she left, I turned the open sign back to the street. The wind carried the faint jingle of the doorbell. Not sharp, not startling, just right. That evening, I brewed a cup of tea, walked to the display case, and looked at the pen again. The last rays of sunset hit the metal, turning it to gold. For a moment, I thought of David. Not with anger, not even pity. Just distance. He was part of the story, but not the ending. "You wanted to own everything," I whispered to the empty shop. "Now I own peace." It's been a year since the auction, since the judgment, since the last phone call I ever took from David. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime. Other times, like it happened only yesterday. The shop has become something else entirely now. The front still says silver signature, but behind the old counter, a new world lives. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, a handful of women gather at the long oak table where I used to sort antiques. They bring folders, envelopes, worn-out ledgers. They get to bring their own pens. It's called Women Reclaim Workshop, a name Lucas and I came up with over coffee. It started as an experiment. One free class on how to read contracts, how to check signatures, how to protect what's yours. 20 women showed up the first week. Now, months later, the waiting list runs down the block. I've rearranged the shop to make space for them. Antique mirrors line the walls, reflecting their faces back at them. Lawyers, grandmothers, single mothers, daughters. The old brass lamp still sits at the head of the table, casting a steady glow. And at the center of that table, in a small glass stand, rests the silver fountain pen. Its nib is capped now, the engraving freshly cut, signed by strength. It's no longer a weapon. It's no longer even a memory. It's a lesson in metal and ink. We start each session with something simple. I hand out a one-page mock contract, intentionally sneaky, filled with hidden clauses and traps, and ask them to find what's wrong. At first, they're shy. By the third session, they're circling clauses, underlining phrases, asking questions out loud. Sometimes I catch myself smiling, watching their confidence bloom. It's like seeing my own reflection a decade ago. Only this time, it's different. This time, no one's being tricked. One afternoon in early spring, a young woman raised her hand. Her hair was pulled back tightly, her hands still ink-stained from her factory job. She looked at the pen in the glass case, then back at me. "Mrs. Jensen," she asked softly, "do you ever regret it?" "Everything?" The room went quiet. Even the clock seemed to pause. I walked over to the pen, touched the glass lightly. Its weight felt like a heartbeat under my fingers. Do I regret it? I repeated. Yes. I regret that I signed so much for other people and so little for myself. I regret that I waited so long to write my own name on my own life. I turned back to them and smiled. Not bitterly, but with a strange, hard-earned warmth. But regret isn't the end of the story. Sometimes it's the start. Because the moment you see it, you can choose to do it differently. There was a silence, then a ripple of nods around the table. The young woman exhaled, her shoulders easing. Another student, a grandmother with silver hair and hands rough from farm work, murmured, "I wish someone had told me that 20 years ago." I nodded. Me too, that's why we're here. After class, when the women left one by one, I stayed behind to tidy the table. Lucas had dropped by earlier, leaving a small stack of new course materials. On top of it sat a note in his neat handwriting. "They're calling you a mentor now. I think you're building something bigger than you know." I smiled, tucking it into my ledger. Sometimes, after the shop empties, I sit alone at that oak table and look around. The mirrors show only me now. But I don't look like the woman from before. My shoulders are straighter, my eyes clearer. There's a steadiness in my hands. The same hands that once shook when they signed a trap. I think of David less and less. When I do, it's not with anger. It's with a kind of distant gratitude. Without his betrayal, I might never have learned the weight of my own name. Spring in Vermont is short, but fierce. The snow melts, the rivers rush, the air smells of thawed earth and new beginnings. Sometimes, when the windows are open and the breeze moves through the shop, the pen catches the sunlight just so, and it flashes like a signal. Not a warning, a beacon, lined by strength. I had the engraving added on the anniversary of the court ruling. It felt like closing a chapter not with a period, but with my own handwriting. That day, one of my students, a middle-aged nurse named Helen, asked the question others were thinking but too polite to voice. "Clara," she said, "if you could go back, would you change anything? Would you sign differently?" I laughed softly, surprising myself. "I would sign earlier," I said. It puzzled. "Not contracts," I explained. "Life. I would sign my own life sooner. Mine sooner. Because every day you wait to claim yourself, someone else writes your story for you." Helen smiled, a little sadly. "Then at least you're signing now." "Yes," I said. "Now." When the last student left that evening, I stayed behind. The shop smelled faintly of coffee and pencil shavings, of new pages turning. I uncapped the pen for the first time in months, dipped it into a bottle of fresh ink, and wrote across a blank page. Today, I sign not for survival. I sign for freedom. Then I capped it again, placed it back in the glass case, and locked it. As the sun went down, I stepped outside. The new sign above the door gleamed silver in the fading light. Silver signature. For a moment, I closed my eyes and let the breeze touch my face. I thought of that night long ago, carrying frames through the snow, believing promises. And then I thought of this night, standing on my own threshold, surrounded by women who would never sign blind again. It was different now. The ink was mine. The name was mine. So, right. The camera light turns red. For a moment, the room is silent except for the soft hum of the old clock behind me. I look straight into the lens. The same eyes that once blinked over contracts I didn't understand now meet the audience. Steady, unflinching. "If one day," I began, "someone places a piece of paper in front of you, don't just read the words. Read their heart." I pause. The faint reflection of the camera glints off the silver fountain pen lying on the table beside me. "Because sometimes," I continue, "the line they want you to sign isn't just a line. It's a door. And you get to choose which side of it you'll stand on." Behind the lens, I imagine women I've never met. Women sitting at kitchen tables with unpaid bills, holding pens that tremble. Women in offices being told to just trust. Women standing in courtrooms, afraid to speak because they were taught. Silence was safer. I speak to them all. "You don't have to be brave every day," I say quietly. "You just have to be awake once. Awake enough to see what's really in front of you. Awake enough to sign your own name for your own reasons." The crew doesn't move. No one breathes. The words hang in the air, raw and simple. Lean forward slightly. And if you ever forget how strong you are, look at your own handwriting. Every curve, every mark, every name you've written to survive, that's proof you've always had power. You just needed to remember where you left it. The light from the window shifts, falling over the glass case behind me. Inside, the pen gleams like a quiet witness. Should a stodger toward it. That pen once trapped me. Now it reminds me, no one else gets to write my story. A small smile finds its way to my lips. Not triumphant. Peaceful. If this story finds you, I say, share it. Not for me. Share it so another woman. Maybe your sister, your friend, your mother, knows she's allowed to stop signing away pieces of herself. The cameraman nods, signaling we're almost done. I take a slow breath and finish softly. When I lost everything, I thought my signature was my mistake. But I see now, it was my beginning. Because sometimes, the thing they use to end you becomes the tool you use to start again. I glance down once more at the silver pen, its engraving catching the last bit of light. Signed by Strength. Then I look back at the camera. At you. My story ends here, I say. But maybe, just maybe, it's the first signature of your freedom. The red light blinks off. Silence. Then a soft click. The sound of the pen's cap closing, final and full.